My executive assistant slid a photo across the desk while I was signing an $80 million contract. In the photo, a woman was pulling a silver suitcase out of the arrivals hall at Capital International Airport. She wore an ivory trench coat. The wind lifted her long hair ever so slightly. A pair of sunglasses hid most of her face, but I'd recognize the curve of that chin with my eyes closed. Sophia Kim. My pen paused for a split second, leaving a tiny blot of ink on the paper. CEO Wang, Ms. Kim landed at 3 this afternoon. She didn't notify anyone. Our people happened to spot her at the airport. My assistant's voice was steady, but I knew he was waiting for my reaction. I handed him the signed contract, then casually flipped the photo face down on the desk. I know. You can go. After the office door closed, I leaned back in my chair and shut my eyes for a moment. 7 years. Sophia. You finally decided to come back. Chapter 1. Looking back, it's almost laughable. From the time I was 18 until I turned 25, I, George Wang, spent my entire youth doing one thing: chasing Sophia. Our families had been close for generations, and we'd grown up together. She was 3 years older than me. When I was little, I'd run after her calling her big sis, and she'd never even bother to look back. Then I grew up. I stopped calling her big sis and started pursuing her instead. I went all in. Everyone in the city knew about it. People said the youngest son of the Wang family had completely lost his mind over the eldest daughter of the Kim family. The day she left the country, I chased her all the way to the airport and nearly got myself killed by a car. She turned around at the security checkpoint, looked at me once, and said only one sentence: "George, don't wait for me." Then she disappeared for 7 years without a single word. For the first 3 years? I really didn't wait. I buried myself in work and dragged the Wang Group from a second-rate company to the top tier of the industry. The results I achieved during those 3 years are still something the board brings up with admiration. In my 4th year, I met a girl named Willow at a banquet. To be honest, the first time I saw her, I caught a glimpse of Sophia in her. The shape of her eyes. The slight upward curl of her lips whenever she spoke. Even the way she frowned from time to time. They were unbelievably alike. Back then, I honestly thought Sophia had cursed me. Everyone I looked at somehow reminded me of her. But the longer I spent with Willow, the more I realized they couldn't have been more different. Sophia was the moon. Untouchable. Cold. Distant. Someone no one could ever truly reach. Willow was the sun. Warm. Fearless. Full of life. Whenever she smiled, a row of perfectly white teeth would show, her eyes curving into crescents that could melt anyone's heart. She never asked why I'd sometimes lose myself staring at her profile. She never asked what was hidden inside the encrypted folder buried at the bottom of my phone's photo gallery. Instead, she found new recipes to cook for me every single day. When I worked past midnight, she'd curl up on the couch waiting for me. Her eyes would barely stay open from exhaustion, yet she'd stubbornly insist she was just binge-watching another show. One time, I drank far too much at a business dinner. By the time I got home, I was throwing up so badly I could barely stand. She scolded me the entire time while making me hangover soup. Halfway through her lecture, she burst into tears first. "George, if you keep drinking like this, I'm breaking up with you." The next morning, after I sobered up, breakfast was already waiting on the table. There was a note pinned beside it. "The porridge is in the pot. I've gone to work. Text me what you want for dinner." As I stood there staring at that little note, something inside me quietly gave way. So, this was what it felt like to be loved so openly. In our 3rd year together, on her birthday, I rented out her favorite French restaurant. She thought it was just a birthday dinner. But halfway through the meal, I took out a ring. She froze. Then her eyes turned red almost instantly. She held out her hand for me to slip the ring onto her finger. Then she threw her arms around me and whispered something into my ear, words I'd never forget for the rest of my life. "George, thank you for choosing me." Not, "I do." But, "Thank you for choosing me." She said it so carefully. So cautiously. As if she'd spent her whole life preparing herself to be the one who wasn't chosen. My heart ached. I pulled her tightly into my arms. "No," I whispered. "I'm the one who should be thanking you, Willow." Chapter 2. After news of our engagement got out, the gossip spread like wildfire. Some people said I'd finally gotten over my heartbreak. Others insisted Willow was nothing more than Sophia's stand-in. Some even made bets that the moment Sophia came back, I'd dump Willow without a second thought. I knew what people were saying. Willow knew too. But she never questioned me. Never made a scene. Sometimes she'd come across those rumors online. She'd quietly set her phone down, glance at me for a moment, then smile and change the subject. She knew there was a corner of my heart that had once belonged to Sophia. But she never tried to erase it. She simply opened a window beside it. And let more light in. Now, Sophia had really come back. I turned the photo over and looked at it one last time. 7 years had passed, yet she hardly seemed to have changed. She still carried that distant, untouchable air. As though the warmth and noise of the world had nothing to do with her. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Willow. Can you get off work on time? I made your favorite pork rib soup with Chinese yam. I checked the time. 4:30. 1 hour until I got off work. The drive home would take about 40 minutes. I'd make it just in time for her to bring the soup to the table. I replied. I'll be home on time. Wait for me. After sending the message, I tossed Sophia's photo into the paper shredder. The gears hummed for a few seconds. The woman in the ivory trench coat was reduced to countless thin strips of paper, mixed together with the discarded contracts I'd signed earlier that day. No one would ever be able to tell them apart again. I didn't want to ask why she'd come back. I didn't care where she'd been over the past 7 years. Whether she'd lived well. Or whether she'd ever thought about me. None of it had anything to do with me anymore. The 18-year-old George would have searched the entire city just because Sophia casually mentioned a certain bouquet. The 25-year-old George wouldn't. The 25-year-old George would leave work on time and go home to drink the pork rib soup his fiancée had made for him. As I picked up my car keys and walked out of the office, Assistant Lin hurried after me. CEO Wang, about Ms. Kim. Should we send someone to pick her up? I pressed the elevator button without looking back. No. Whether Sophia comes back to this country or not. What does that have to do with me? As the elevator doors slid shut, I caught the look on Assistant Lin's face. It was subtle. The kind of expression that said, I knew you'd finally grown up. Yeah. I had. I'd gone from a foolish boy chasing the moon to a man who finally knew what he wanted. The soup was piping hot. Willow had forgotten to add salt. But when she looked at me with those hopeful eyes and asked if it tasted good, I still smiled. It's delicious. Her eyes curved into crescents. Beaming with happiness, she turned toward the kitchen to serve me another bowl. I wrapped my arms around her from behind. She tilted her head slightly. What's wrong? She was still holding the soup bowl. Nothing. I just wanted to hold you. She laughed softly, set the bowl down, turned around, slipped her arms around my neck, and stood on her tiptoes to kiss my forehead. Then she said with complete seriousness, Mr. George Wang, you've been very well behaved today. So here's your reward. Looking into her bright, sparkling eyes, I suddenly realized something. Every woman in the world combined couldn't compare to the one standing in front of me. The one who always forgot to put salt in the soup. Moonlight might be beautiful, but it was cold. The person in my arms was warm. She was my son. The next morning, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. Just 3 words. I'm back. There was no signature. But I knew exactly who it was. Over the past 7 years, she changed numbers countless times. She never saved mine. Each number was used only once or twice. Like a faint, half-hearted attempt to test the waters. Every time I'd received one of those messages before, my heart would race. This time, I looked at it for 2 seconds. Then I handed my phone to Assistant Lin. Have this number blocked. Assistant Lin froze for a second. Then nodded. Understood, CEO Wang. Outside the window, the sun was shining brightly. Below, the city buzzed with traffic and life. I picked up the wedding planner's proposal from my desk. On the last page, I signed my name. Then I sent Willow a message. I booked the wedding venue. The estate you said you loved. 3 seconds later, a string of screaming emojis popped up. Right after that came a voice message. I tapped it. She sounded so excited her voice practically cracked. Really? Really? But that place is so expensive. Smiling, I typed back. Expensive? There's no price too high to marry you. After I hit send, I leaned back in my chair. For the first time in 7 years, I felt completely at peace. The moon could stay where it belonged, high in the sky. The woman I loved was at home, making soup for me. Chapter 3. News of Sophia Kim's return spread through a city like wildfire. It traveled even faster than I'd expected. That very night, my WeChat was flooded with messages. My childhood friend David dropped 7 or 8 texts in the group chat in a row. Have you heard? Sophia's back. She went straight to the Kim group today. Looks like she's staying for good this time. Everyone else in the chat was waiting for my response. I glanced at the messages, locked my phone, and placed it on the nightstand. Then I turned over and wrapped my arms around Willow, who was already asleep. She was never a graceful sleeper. She curled herself into a little ball and instinctively burrowed into my chest, her hair brushing against my chin and making it itch. I lowered my head and kissed the top of her hair. Stop. She mumbled sleepily before snuggling even closer. I smiled. Then closed my eyes and went to sleep. The next morning, after the executive meeting ended, Assistant Lin knocked on my office door. His expression was complicated. CEO Wang. Ms. Kim is downstairs at the reception desk. I was reviewing a proposal when I looked up. What is she here for? She says. Assistant Lin hesitated for a moment. She's representing the Kim Group to discuss a business partnership. He paused before adding, she's been waiting downstairs for over an hour. I didn't let her come up. That actually surprised me. I knew Sophia Kim better than most. Pride was in her bones. She'd always been the one people waited for. Never the other way around. If this had been the old Sophia, she'd have walked out after 5 minutes. Looks like even the moon had finally come down to earth after 7 years. I closed the proposal. After a brief thought, I said, send her up. When Sophia walked into my office, I was still on the phone. I gestured for her to sit. She quietly took a seat on the sofa across from me. Her back was perfectly straight. Her hands rested neatly together on her knees. Elegant. Composed. Like a painting. Only seeing her up close did I realize how much she'd changed. The corners of her eyes were slightly more defined. Her jawline had become sharper. She'd lost a noticeable amount of weight. The cool distance she'd always carried now felt even more pronounced. She wore a sharply tailored black skirt suit. Her hair was pinned up, revealing a slender, fair neck. Around it hung a delicate silver necklace. A tiny star pendant rested at the end. I recognized it immediately. I'd given her that necklace for her 18th birthday. It had cost every penny of 6 months' worth of allowance. Back then, she'd only looked at it and quietly said thank you. I'd assumed she'd thrown it away years ago. I looked away. Hung up the call. Then nodded politely. Ms. Kim. Sorry to keep you waiting. The formal address made her eyelashes tremble ever so slightly. But she quickly regained her composure. She took a document out of her bag and placed it on the desk. CEO Wang. The Kim Group has a large mixed-use commercial development launching in the second half of the year. We'd like to know if the Wang Group is interested in partnering with us. I picked up the proposal and skimmed through it. It really was an excellent project. The Kim Group had deep roots in commercial real estate. The location was prime. The planning was solid. If the partnership went through, the Wang Group stood to make a very impressive profit. Still, I didn't give her an answer right away. I closed the folder and looked at her. A project this important. Why are you the one handling it? I joined my father's company. This project is under my responsibility. She met my gaze without flinching. Her eyes were clear. Steady. Open. George. I studied overseas for 7 years. It'd be a waste if I came back without putting any of it to use. Chapter 4. She said it so casually. But I knew what she meant. Those 7 years hadn't been wasted. She hadn't left to avoid me. She'd left to become a better version of herself before coming back. But what did any of that have to do with me? It's a solid project. I'll have our business division evaluate it. We'll let your team know once we've reached a decision. I took a sip of my tea. My tone remained polite. Professional. Distant. Sophia was silent for a few seconds. Then she spoke again. I heard you're engaged. I am. Congratulations. Thank you. Silence settled between us once more. She lowered her gaze to her folded hands as though carefully choosing her words. After a long pause, she looked back at me. A faint smile touched her lips. The day at the airport. When I told you not to wait for me. You really didn't. There was far too much hidden in that sentence. If I'd wanted to hear it, I probably would have found regret. Reluctance. Maybe even a trace of remorse. But I didn't want to. People have to move forward. I answered. You're right. She stood up. Smoothed the wrinkles from her skirt. Once again becoming the composed, graceful Sophia Kim everyone knew. Then I'll wait to hear from you regarding the project. Goodbye, CEO Wang. I asked Assistant Lin to escort her downstairs. After the elevator doors closed, I picked up the proposal she'd left behind. As I flipped through the last few pages, a small sticky note slipped out from the remarks section. It was written in her handwriting. Is the osmanthus tree outside my old house still there? My fingers paused. The old Kim residence had an osmanthus tree growing in the front yard. Every September, its blossoms filled the entire courtyard with their sweet fragrance. Sophia's bedroom window faced that tree. When we were kids, she loved sitting by the window with a book. The scent of osmanthus drifted inside as the breeze lifted her hair. She looked so quiet. So beautiful. Like someone who had stepped out of a painting. Back then, the first thing I'd do after school was run to her house. I'd stand beneath that osmanthus tree and call her name. Most of the time. She ignored me. But every now and then, she'd toss a tiny osmanthus blossom out of the window. For a 17-year-old boy, catching that single little flower was enough to keep him smiling all night. I tore the sticky note off, crushed it into a ball, and tossed it into the trash. Whether that osmanthus tree was still there had nothing to do with me. When I got home that evening, Willow was curled up on the couch scrolling through her phone. The moment she saw me walk in, she immediately put it down and ran over. Standing on tiptoe, she carefully examined my face from every angle. Then she narrowed her eyes. Who did you see today? I changed my shoes without the slightest change in expression. A bunch of clients. Why? She leaned closer and sniffed my suit like a cautious little puppy. Gardenia. And a pretty expensive one too. I almost laughed. Sophia had always worn a gardenia perfume. 7 years later. She still hadn't changed it. Willow's nose was ridiculously sharp. Even I hadn't noticed the scent. Must have picked it up in the elevator. I lied without missing a beat. Then casually changed the subject. So, what's for dinner? She wasn't fooled in the slightest. Crossing her arms, she blocked my path. Tilting her head, she glared at me with an expression that was somehow fierce and adorable at the same time. George. Don't think I don't know Sophia came to your office today. I raised an eyebrow. News really did travel fast. David and that big mouth of his. One of these days I was going to sew his lips shut. Yeah. She came. She was representing the Kim Group to discuss a partnership. We talked for less than 20 minutes before she left. Just business? Just business. Chapter 5. Willow stared into my eyes for several long seconds, as if trying to confirm something. I met her gaze without the slightest hesitation. I had nothing to hide. A moment later, the tension in her expression eased a little. Still, she let out a small huff and turned toward the kitchen, muttering under her breath, if it's just a business meeting, why'd she have to wear so much perfume? I walked over and wrapped my arms around her from behind, resting my chin on top of her head. Willow. Are you jealous? I'm not. She answered immediately. Oh. Then why are your ears so red? She instinctively reached up and touched one. Sure enough. It was warm. Embarrassed, she jabbed me in the ribs with her elbow. Do you still want your pork rib soup or not? I do. Then keep your mouth shut. So I obediently shut up. But I didn't let go of her. She moved around the kitchen cooking. I clung to her like a koala, awkwardly shuffling along wherever she went. Eventually, she couldn't take it anymore. She turned around, dabbed a flour-covered finger on the tip of my nose, and burst into laughter at the white smudge she'd left behind. George. You're such an idiot. Looking at her smile, my heart melted all over again. That night, after Willow fell asleep, I stepped onto the balcony, lit a cigarette, and called David. He answered almost immediately. Well. CEO Wang calling me personally. What an honor. Did Sophia go see you? There was a second of silence. Then David gave an awkward laugh. Yeah. She came asking about you. She wanted to know how you've been these past few years. I didn't tell her much. I just said you've been doing great. Your career's booming. You're engaged. And your fiancé's gorgeous. That's it. I didn't say anything else. What else did she ask? David hesitated. She asked, what kind of person your fiancé is? Then he sighed. George. I'm being serious. Sophia's different this time. She spent 7 years overseas by herself. I heard she didn't come back until she'd finally let everything go. Just keep your head on straight. Don't do anything stupid. I stubbed out my cigarette in the ashtray. Looking over the city lights, I watched the neon signs flicker like countless blinking eyes. Do something stupid? I said quietly. I've never been more clear-headed. After hanging up, I went back into the bedroom. At some point, Willow had rolled over onto my side of the bed. Her entire face was buried in the pillow. She was sleeping without a shred of elegance. Her phone was still on. The screen was open to a wedding planning app. Displayed on it was a bouquet. Pink peonies. White baby's breath. Wedding bouquet, option 3. Peonies were her favorite flowers. She always said peonies were too extravagant. Roses were too ordinary. Only peonies felt just right. Beautiful without being overly seductive. Graceful without trying too hard. I placed her phone on the nightstand. Then lay down and pulled her into my arms. Even asleep, she instinctively found the most comfortable position. One leg landed across mine. Her arm slipped around my waist. She mumbled something in her sleep. I couldn't make out the words. But the last syllable sounded like G-O. I couldn't help smiling. A stand-in. Who exactly was supposed to be whose stand-in? Willow had never been anyone's replacement. She was simply Willow. She loved cooking with chili peppers. Sophia couldn't handle spicy food at all. When Willow laughed, the whole house seemed to fill with her voice. Sophia always smiled with quiet restraint. When Willow was angry, she'd twist my ear. When she was happy, she'd leap into my arms and wrap herself around my neck. When she was sad, she'd hide under the blankets and cry by herself. Everything about her was vivid, warm, overflowing with life. Uniquely hers. If anyone still believed I chose Willow because she looked like Sophia, then they were completely blind. Chapter 6. On the third day after Sophia returned, we finally ran into each other at a private gala in a city I hadn't wanted to attend. But the host was a longtime business partner of the Wang Group and someone I respected deeply. There was no polite way to decline. Willow happened to have a company dinner that evening, so I went alone. The moment I walked in, I saw Sophia. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows with a glass of white wine in her hand, surrounded by a crowd. 7 years hadn't changed a thing. The eldest daughter of the Kim family still commanded the room without even trying. She chatted effortlessly. Calm. Confident. As if she'd never left. The instant I entered, her gaze traveled across the room and landed on me with perfect accuracy. For one brief moment, the entire ballroom seemed to fall silent. People noticed. Of course they did. Some looked openly. Others pretended not to. Everyone there remembered how hopelessly I had chased Sophia back then. Now that she'd returned, they were all waiting to see what would happen. Without changing my expression, I looked away and walked to the bar. A soda water, please. David appeared out of nowhere, drink in hand. He leaned closer and lowered his voice. Bro, whatever you do tonight, don't lose your cool. Everyone's watching you. I took a sip of my soda water and looked at him in confusion. What exactly am I supposed to lose my cool over? David stared at me for a moment. Then sighed. Guess I worried for nothing. Halfway through the evening, I was standing in a quiet corner discussing a project with CEO Song. In the middle of our conversation, the atmosphere behind us suddenly shifted. I turned around. Sophia had somehow made her way over. A wineglass rested lightly in her hand. The smile on her face was perfectly measured. CEO Wang. CEO Song. I hope I'm not interrupting. CEO Song immediately got the hint. He found an excuse and slipped away, leaving the two of us alone. Tonight she wore a smoky blue evening gown. Her hair fell naturally over her shoulders. Her makeup was understated. Compared to the sharp professional image she presented in my office, she looked much softer. She raised her glass and lightly clinked it against mine. The meeting in your office was all business. Tonight can be a little more relaxed. She glanced at my drink. You're not drinking? I'm driving. So soda water. She nodded. Silence lingered for a few moments. Then she suddenly said something I hadn't expected. I've met your fiancé. My hand tightened slightly around the glass. I frowned. Willow had never mentioned it. When had they met? Where? Had Sophia gone looking for her? Relax. It's not what you're thinking. As if she'd read my mind, Sophia smiled faintly. We happened to run into each other yesterday at a cafe near the World Trade Center. She was sitting at the table next to mine. I didn't know her personally, but I'd seen pictures of her online. She's even prettier in person. And she has the sweetest smile. Her voice was calm. Almost relieved. Yet beneath that calmness, I could still hear what she was trying so hard to hide. I introduced myself. I told her I was Sophia. She froze for a second. Then she smiled and said hello. Sophia slowly swirled the wine in her glass as she recalled the encounter. Then she said, I know who you are. George used to like you very much. My fingers tightened around the soda water. Willow. What expression had she worn when she said that? What had she really been feeling? Had she? Do you know what she said next? Sophia turned to look at me. Her eyes were filled with emotions too complicated to name. She said, Thank you for not saying yes to him back then. Otherwise, I never would have met him. Chapter 7. For a moment, I was stunned. Then I couldn't help laughing. That was exactly the kind of thing Willow would say. She might seem carefree on the surface, but she understood everything. She never avoided my past. She never doubted herself because Sophia had returned. She could even sincerely thank the woman I'd once loved. That wasn't a declaration of victory. It was simply the confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was. Sophia watched the smile that had unconsciously appeared on my face. She lowered her eyes and remained silent for a long time. The music at the gala changed. Soft jazz drifted through the ballroom. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittered with lights. George, she said quietly, if I hadn't left 7 years ago, would the person standing beside you today have been me? There was no way I could answer that. Because she hadn't stayed. That what-if had never existed in the first place. Life doesn't come with what-ifs. Only choices. And their consequences. 7 years ago, she chose to leave. I chose to grow. Willow chose to love me. Every choice was irreversible. Together, they became the life we had today. Still, looking at the way she quietly waited for my answer, I gave it serious thought. Then I answered honestly. I don't know what would have happened 7 years ago. But I do know one thing. I set my glass down, looked her straight in the eyes, and said each word clearly. My wife is Willow. The words weren't sharp. They didn't cut instantly. But they landed with undeniable weight. Sophia's smile froze for the briefest moment. Then it slowly softened into something impossible to describe. Somewhere between acceptance and heartbreak. She lowered her head and took a sip of wine. When she looked up again, her eyes were slightly red. But she held herself together. Not a single emotion spilled over. That's good, she said softly. You finally found the person you've been waiting for. I shook my head. I didn't wait for her. She found me. After saying that, I set my empty glass down, gave her a polite nod, then turned and walked away. The moment I pushed open the ballroom doors, the cool breeze of early autumn rushed toward me, clearing my mind. I took out my phone and called Willow. She answered after the very first ring. Finished already? I just wrapped up too. I had a little to drink. My head's kind of fuzzy. Her voice carried that soft, tipsy sweetness that made me want to pull her into my arms. Stay where you are. I'm coming to get you. You don't have to make a special trip. I can just call a taxi, don't move. I'll be there. I hung up. Pressed the unlock button on my car key. Got behind the wheel. And started the engine. The car's Bluetooth connected to my phone automatically. One of Willow's favorite old songs began to play. Its melody was gentle, unhurried. I rolled down the window. The night wind swept through the car, carrying away every lingering trace of gardenia perfume. My phone lit up. It was a message from David. "Bro, you're unbelievable. Do you have any idea how much Sophia drank after you left?" I glanced at it once, then turned the phone face down. The woman in someone else's heart was no longer my responsibility. My own son was still out there, waiting for me in the chilly night. I needed to get to her. Chapter 8. The car pulled out of the underground parking garage and merged into the city's nighttime traffic. Neon lights flowed across the windows in streaks of red, blue, gold, and purple, like a dazzling river of color. About 20 minutes later, I spotted Willow standing beneath a street lamp outside her office building. She was still wearing the apricot-colored blazer she'd left home in that morning, pacing back and forth in her heels while glancing at her phone every now and then. The early autumn night carried a chill. She wrapped her blazer tighter around herself as the wind tousled her hair, and the streetlight stretched her shadow long across the pavement. I pulled up in front of her and gave the horn a quick tap. She looked up, and the moment she recognized my car, a bright smile bloomed across her face. She hurried around to the passenger side, opened the door, and climbed in. As she buckled her seatbelt, she grinned. "That was fast. What, did you race all the way here?" I didn't answer. Instead, I leaned over to check that her seatbelt was properly fastened, then gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She froze for a second and blinked at me. "What's wrong? Why are you acting so strange today?" "How am I acting strange?" "I don't know." She tilted her head and studied me for a moment. Then she suddenly leaned closer, sniffed me once. Then again. Her expression turned a little complicated. "You went to that gala tonight, didn't you?" "Yeah." "You ran into her?" "Yeah." Willow fell silent for 2 seconds before leaning back against the passenger seat. Staring straight ahead, she asked in an unerringly calm voice, "What did you two talk about?" I started the car and casually turned the steering wheel. She asked me, if she hadn't left 7 years ago, would the person standing beside me today have been her? Willow turned to look at my profile without blinking. "And, what did you say?" I pulled the car over to the side of the road, unbuckled my seatbelt, and turned to face her. The alcohol had left a faint blush on her cheeks. Her bright eyes shimmered with 3 parts anticipation, 3 parts nervousness, and 4 parts stubborn composure she was desperately trying to maintain. She looked impossibly adorable and heartbreakingly vulnerable. I told her. I cupped her face, my thumb gently brushing the corner of her eye. "I don't know about 7 years ago. But 7 years later. My wife is named Willow." Her eyelashes trembled. The light in her eyes flickered. Then she immediately pushed my face away, turned to stare out the window, and said in a voice that tried to sound calm but still trembled slightly, "Who says I'm your wife? We haven't even gotten married yet. Watch your wording." In the rearview mirror, I caught her secretly wiping the corner of her eye with her sleeve. She took one deep breath. Then another. Finally, she couldn't hold herself together anymore. She spun around, grabbed me by the collar, and pulled me toward her until our noses were almost touching. Looking straight into my eyes, she whispered, "George, say it again." "I don't know about 7 years ago." But 7 years later, before I could finish, she kissed me. Her lips carried the faint sweetness of plum wine. They were soft, yet the kiss was fierce, as if she needed to make absolutely certain this moment was real. I froze for a heartbeat. Then I slid a hand behind her head and deepened the kiss. Chapter 9. Outside the car window, the city's neon lights still shimmered tirelessly. In the distance, an osmanthus tree swayed in the evening breeze, its tiny golden blossoms drifting softly to the ground until they blanketed the pavement. After a long while, I finally let her go. Resting my forehead against hers, my breathing was still uneven, but my voice had never been more sincere. "Willow, I've never thought of you as someone I settled for. So don't ever think of yourself that way. Sophia is wonderful, but you're even more wonderful. You're the best person I've ever met." I pulled her into my arms. Resting my chin on top of her head as the faint floral scent of her shampoo filled my nose. "I know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Let's go home. The pork rib soup I made is still simmering. You already made me finish it. You'll have to make another pot for me tomorrow." "Then, instant noodles tonight? That's it? Fine. Instant noodles with 2 eggs. Is that fancy enough for you?" She burst into laughter. When she stopped laughing, she leaned against my shoulder and quietly stayed there without another word. I started the car again and pulled back onto the main road. The cool breeze of early autumn slipped through the half-open window, carrying the delicate fragrance of blooming osmanthus. In the rearview mirror, the cool, distant figure standing before the ballroom's floor-to-ceiling windows grew farther and farther away, smaller and smaller, until she disappeared into the city's sea of lights, impossible to make out anymore. Some people's stories end when they reach their stop. Others are only just beginning their journey. The one who got away was never something that needed to be conquered. It was simply a beautiful dream hanging on the horizon of youth, a dream that was genuinely beautiful, but only that. The hand truly worth holding is the one that offers you a bowl of hot soup after every exhausting day. It's the person who, even when everyone else sees the invincible CEO Wang, still sees nothing more than an ordinary man who deserves to be cared for. By the time we arrived home, Willow had fallen asleep in the passenger seat. Her breathing was slow and steady, and the faintest smile still lingered on her lips. I didn't wake her. I turned off the engine and sat quietly in the driver's seat, watching her for a while. The streetlight shone through the window, settling gently across her face like a veil of soft light. What was 7 years, really? Some people return after 7 years, hoping to pick up where they left off. But the warmth someone else gives you in just 3 years can outweigh everything another person could offer in a lifetime. Chapter 10. My phone vibrated. A text message from an unfamiliar number. I knew exactly who it was. Without even opening it, I swiped across the screen and deleted it without hesitation. Then I gently patted Willow's cheek. Wake up. We're home. She blinked awake groggily. The moment she saw me, she smiled instinctively and reached out toward me. I can't walk anymore. Carry me upstairs. My feet hurt from wearing heels all day, she mumbled in a soft, spoiled voice. Please. I let out a helpless sigh, got out of the car, walked around to the passenger side, opened the door, and bent down to let her climb onto my back. She wrapped herself around me, her legs swinging lazily as she hummed an out-of-tune song. The motion sensor lights in the stairwell flicked on one floor after another, casting our overlapping shadows against the wall beneath their warm glow. Her breath brushed the back of my neck. Warm. Ticklish. George. Yeah? I love you. My steps paused for just a moment, and I couldn't stop the smile tugging at my lips. I know. Can't you just say you love me too? No. Why not? If I say it too often, it'll lose its value. She huffed and lightly bit my shoulder. It wasn't hard. More like a kitten chewing on a toy. Chuckling, I adjusted my grip beneath her legs and carried her a little more securely. When we reached the front door, I set her down and took out my keys. She slipped her arms around my waist from behind, rested her cheek against my back, and murmured so quietly that anyone else might have missed it. But I heard every word. George, the best decision I've ever made in my life was walking up to you first at that gala. I slid the key into the lock. The door opened a crack, and warm golden light spilled out from inside. I turned around and looked straight into her eyes. Then, carefully, sincerely, one word at a time, I said, me too. Back then, at that gala, everyone had surrounded me raising toasts, trying to make connections, handing me business cards. Only Willow had walked over to the quiet corner with a glass of orange juice in her hand. She looked at me and said, "Your tie is crooked." Then she reached out and retied it for me herself. When she finished, she took a step back, studied me for a moment, and smiled. It was the smile I remembered for the rest of the night. There. Much more handsome. From that moment on, she stepped into my life and never left. Hand in hand, we walked through the front door into our home filled with warm light. The door clicked softly shut behind us, leaving the fragrance of osmanthus and the dreams of the past outside forever. Inside, the water in the pot hadn't reached a boil yet. The instant noodles were still waiting in the cabinet. The living room lights were just bright enough. This was my ordinary, beautiful life. This was the future I wanted to spend one day after another. What's so great about some unforgettable crush? My Willow is way better.